said, hopefully y'all had a good leg stretch and you got your beverage of choice to get you through the last bit of this workshop. And I promise that we're going to talk about some good stuff. All right, so we did the first one, which was the unity of purpose, and it looks as though that can be something that we look to work on in the future. So let's spend a little bit of time on roles and there are definitely some roles that are appropriate for the board and for the superintendent. They're definite and distinct because the role of the board is governance and the role of the superintendent is management and operations. I mean, that in its most basic form are the differences. But if we take a look at that, exactly does that governance look like? Because that's a crazy word and it's hard to kind of wrap my arms around it. So NSBA took that research and distilled it down and said, these are the 5 things that boards need to spend their time mastering. And if they do that, and they do it in a positive way, they're going to have the best opportunity for positive impact on student achievement in their districts. And look at that first one, setting the direction, right? We talked a lot about that just now in the unity of purpose. It doesn't mean that the board sets the vision absent any input or participation from others. It just means that you ensure a vision is in place that has high expectations, right, for teaching and learning. You'll notice that the second area that a board needs to pay attention to is an accountability, and that's all about high academic standards, transparency, and just making sure that systems are in place that are understandable and, again, transparent to the community, right? And that evaluation plays a role in that accountability. The third one is around the board's role in policy making. And I saw from your website that you use Neola,
Yes.
right? And so your policies are actually developed by a company, and then you might make some tweaks to them in your approval processes. You might have some A/B options, but for the most part, you're not having a lot of policy discussion. And I encourage boards, even if they're using an outside policy service, that they still need to, have a good handle on what their policies say. Now, again, you guys are a pretty young board, so I'm not going to ask anybody to actually call themselves out, but I would ask how many of you have spent some time reading all your policies, especially your zeros, your first section, which is board bylaws.
Yes.
I definitely have. I'm super afraid of making mistakes, so I've probably spent too much time reading the bylaws and the policies to try to soak everything in.
Okay, and so that's great. I mean, sometimes boards just kind of step away from it, saying, well, our policies are in place, this company, gives them to us and we're good to go. And it's still a board's role to make sure that they're pertinent to your district, right? They are written for a national standard. And sometimes districts have nuances, and unless you have some mechanism in place that you regularly review your policies, something could get missed. So I'm just saying, it's still a responsibility of the board to know what their policies say, to make sure that policies are being followed, and to make sure that they align with your practices. And if they don't, you have to ask yourselves and have a conversation with the superintendent around, why aren't they following what our practices are, and which thing do we have to change, the policy or the practice, right, to make it work for us. So, good conversation for the future is, how do we make sure that we still own the policy as a board, even when someone else is writing it?
Debbie, our policies that are on our website are not the ones that some of us have the actual policies in hand that don't match some of the policies that are on the website.
Okay, so somebody probably needs to take a look at that and make sure that The most up-to-date ones are available for both the board and the public.
Well, that's the problem there. We're trying to update the policies, but that's a process in itself.
Yep.
But so for me, I have, and I think for a couple of others, I have like the 3 binder that has all the policies. And I know at least 2 of them don't have the actual 3 ring binder. And if you go on our website, we have the people that have the 3-ring binder have the old version, and the ones that are on the website are actually the up-to-date policies that we have not yet adopted, I believe. And of course, I can't go through all of them. You know, I mean, the ones I've been going through, I found that that's the problem.
So it seems like there's some disagreement potentially around what's what. I would just suggest that, you know, the board and superintendent make some time moving forward to make sure that they're all in alignment, right? So what's on the website is what everybody should have. One of your other bylaws says that your new folks are supposed to get a copy of the policy manual, so that should be done. That's part of your board orientation bylaw. So you just want to make sure those things are in alignment, right? And that you have a sense of what those policies say and how they're being carried out. The 4th area is community leadership. And this is done primarily, and this one is always a little bit difficult for boards. This is done primarily through advocacy efforts, both your own and encouraging your public, right, to advocate for the students in your district and for public education. And then community engagement. But in this sense, what it's really saying is making sure that a system is in place for 2-way communication. So it's not saying you as individuals run out and speak to everybody in the community, right? And, you know, get their comments and make sure they're shared or whatever. It's saying that a structure is put in place so that information can get out to your community members, not only your parents, but all your community. And there's a mechanism or mechanisms for that feedback, right? Because 2-way means 2-way. And one of the things about a strategic plan is it does that, right? Because you're including them in the development and you're getting input from them, as well as sharing out what the process is and the progress towards it. So again, it's ensuring structures are in place. That's the work of the board. The actual communication pieces are handled by the superintendent and staff. The last one cannot be overlooked. And we've been talking a lot about relationship, right? And this is all about that relationship. And it's primarily dealing with the board and superintendent, and then the board members themselves. So imagine that, you know, this is an area you're struggling with, and we know from the research that it is one of the 5 areas you have to conquer. You have to master this one if it's going to make the difference, right? You can't just be good at the other stuff and this one happens, because that's not the way it works. So, you know, we need to spend some time figuring out additional ways to help with that piece. Questions on those 5 areas before we get sort of down into the granular stuff around responsibility?
I guess I have a question maybe, and it kind of involves these, maybe not specifically, but when you talk about this, excuse me, the 7 board members and then Angel, and we 7 are setting the direction and whatnot. The board meetings are our business meetings, and Angel is not a part of it, so to speak. He has his little portion, but it's our meeting, it's not a group of 8, it's a group of 7, and he is there for his superintendent's report. Can you clarify that? Because I what used to be and what is now is not necessarily, they don't run together. And for clarity for me and the others, what exactly are we looking at?
Yeah, so the Board of Education's meeting is the meeting of the 7 board members. It is your board meeting run by your president, right? Which in this case, Cindy, is you, right?
Yes.
And so everything else that happens at that meeting is there to support the work of the board. So Angel's involvement in the meeting is important because he is the person that you have entrusted, right, to manage the district. And so he plays a significant role in the meeting, but technically, yes, it is the board's meeting. When people come up to do public comment, they are addressing the board. As the president, you might refer an issue to the superintendent to ask him to, report out on something, to answer something, right? If a board member has a question, again, you refer to him to, provide a response for that, right? So he's there to support the work. So he plays a primary function in the meeting. It's just not the same as the board members' function. That's why he doesn't vote, right? He recommends things to you and the 7 of you vote.
Right.
So it's really this interconnection that you have. But again, separate and different, right? Separate and distinct roles. Does that answer your question, Cindy?
Yeah, thank you.
Debbie, can I ask you a question about that as well?
Sure.
So besides the 7 board members and the superintendent, are most boards included with the finance manager, HR, or anyone else?
Sitting at the board table, you mean?
Yes.
You know what? What I have found is there are different cultures in different districts. And I'm going to say that the board and superintendent should come together around a decision that works and serves the board best. So I've seen everything from those cabinet positions sit at the board table to sitting at a table off to the side and yet still recognized by, having microphones and, a place at the table. I've seen them sit in the front row. So I've seen all sorts of things. And I think I've seen a number of your administrators on here this evening, if I'm correct. I'm not sure, but I think. And, so there are some boards who, when they have work sessions, they include some cabinet members that they work closely with. And then there are other boards and superintendent teams who say, nope, it's really just the 8 of us. And that's anywhere in between. So whatever decisions you make should be made together around that. Again, what serves the work of the board best, right, in those meetings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting pieces about board work is, you hear that there's a science to things and then there's an art. Board work is more art than science. Like there are definitely some pieces that are pretty concrete. That would be the science stuff, right? But then the other stuff is really very nuanced, depending upon district. And so this is what I would say. If what you're doing currently is working well, then by all means continue it. If it's not working the way that would help the board work effectively together with the superintendent and their team, then consider making a change that would. But it's not something that the board just makes without any input from the superintendent. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So here's another way to look at this. And this is actually stolen from our CBA 101 class. And for the brand newly elected board members on here, if you have not signed up for CBA 101 yet, I would encourage you do that. So you had to have been elected in the November election for the first time and not have served prior to that. So Cindy, you wouldn't qualify because you were on the board before. But if you sign up for CBA 101, the very new folks, it is free this year. It's a complimentary as part of your membership. And when you complete the course, whether you do it online or that you do a virtual class, and I would suggest the virtual if you can make it work for you, you'll also receive NSBA's Becoming a Better Board Member book complimentary. Again, something we've never done before, and it's a great resource for you.
Hey,
So,
Debbie,
yes.
Debbie?
if I was appointed January or February last year, this was the first election I won. Would I be
No.
able to get that or no?
Nope, doesn't count. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
We had to put like this, you know, the bookends on it, and so we felt like this is where we were going to put the bookend. Was November was the election. So the class is still available to take, and you have information in your bylaws about board development, and probably supported by your district. Should you decide that you want to take that class, the district would maybe pay for it. But it's still a good investment of your time. Who was the other question?
It was just me, Debbie, that we had gotten, Beth, Gloria, and I got voted in 2018, and we didn't do a lot with MASB the very first year, and we didn't have that available. I know we all went to the new board meeting.
Yeah, this is the only time we have ever offered the complimentary.
Okay.
And we did it because the board of directors has said they really feel like it's important for new board members to get a solid footing, especially in this time of COVID. And so this year they wanted to see how that went, if they offered it, and if it really was helpful and engaged people. So I just wanted to put it out there for you. It's a great investment in your time. It's a nice foundational piece for board service. So this is taken from that class, and I think it really lays out, and it's got a third column in here too, because I think it really helps to see the whole picture. So when you look at that first column on the left, right, the work of the board, imagine yourself up in a hot air balloon, right? That 50,000 foot view. 50,000 foot, you're probably up really in an airplane, not a hot air balloon, but you get the idea, right? You're way up high and you're looking down into the district. And so you're not looking at details the same way that the second column, which would be Angel and his administrative staff, or the third column, which is those folks right down on the ground, right, doing the actual work. Yours is going to be more general in nature because you're sort of overseeing the whole district, and then you're understanding how those parts relate to each other. You're focusing on the community's needs and interests, but again, only to inform your thinking as you vote, using those pieces you're currently missing, those guideposts, right, your vision and your goals, to make your decision. So you're listening to the community's interests, but you're still weighing those against all of the interests in your district, right? You're not representing a certain group. You're looking long-term, right? So that's where you can see the strategic plan fits really nicely there, because you want to be looking out far enough into the future. You're providing that structure, right? And you're doing that as a board through those policies, through the budget that you pass, right? And through the superintendent that you hire. Those three main functions are how you make sure that the district is doing the work it needs to do. And you're setting those clear targets. That's why those goals are in place, so that everybody knows the expectations of the board, and then is working towards those. So when you move to that second column and you're looking at Angel's work and the work of his team, you're closer to the ground, right? So you're still not doing the actual instruction, but you're managing all those parts and pieces, instruction, operations, right? All of that other stuff that supports the work in the classroom. And so now you're looking more at individual buildings and departments, right? You're focusing on working with smaller groups, not the overall community. You're starting to look at segments more. You're you're looking out, although, you know, a superintendent is specifically different here, right? They're still looking out the 3 to 5 years, but everybody else is shorter term, a little closer, right? How do I take that 3 to 5 year plan and make it more manageable in 1 or 2 year increments, given whatever my area of influence is. And then you're providing structure, but now closer to the building levels and potentially departments. And then you're actually taking the targets that have been set and you're creating and implementing the actual work, right? You're starting to ensure that it's happening. So you're moving from what the district is supposed to do to how it gets done, right? And so those are the two, like if there's 2 phrases I want you to think about as you delineate your responsibilities in Angels, is the board is the what and the superintendent is the how. So as you start hearing yourself ask questions at the board table, again, one of those areas that you can self-monitor, am I asking a what question or am I asking a how question? And I'm going to show you what a couple of those might look like. And then just so that you can see it, right, that 3rd level, right at the ground level, much more impact directly with the students. And you're starting to look at things really short term, right? And so a good example of this are lesson plans, right? Where you're making plans and then you're changing them to address needs on a much shorter term basis, right? And the refinements happen much quicker so that you can make course corrections when necessary, right? So do those 3 differences help you get a better sense of governance versus management? A little bit. I have to tell you, this is probably one of the areas that board members struggle with the most is, you know, in our everyday lives,
Gotta turn that down.
right? Whether we work outside of the home or inside the home, doesn't matter. We have a tendency to be problem solvers, right? And project managers, and someone might want to turn their microphone off because we can hear conversations going on.
I'm sorry. That was me.
And so we're problem solvers ourselves, right? And so we just kind of roll up our sleeves and try to do the work and solve the problems. And for most of us, if we think about it, that's how we run a campaign as well. I am going to join the school board and I am going to get some of these problems solved and fixed. Except that's not the role of a board member. The role of the board member is to oversee the district and then evaluate the superintendent that you hired to manage it. Real tough distinction for many, because you can't touch governance. You can touch management, you can touch operations. So it's easy to go in that direction, especially when the conversation starts that way, right? I can see the color of the carpet in the media center. It's harder to understand how does all of this affect student achievement? And what's my role as a board member in that, right? Concrete, very not concrete. And so board members struggle with this all the time. So what I have in the slides, and again, you're going to get this PowerPoint tomorrow, and I'm going to show you. We're not going to go through every one of these, but I want you to have them. And I'm also going to send you another document that has them just in some different format. And because we all learn a little bit differently. So there's some that are just sentences and there's some that are in boxes like this. And it's really whatever works for you. But when you get these, what I want you to do is really look at the verbs that are being used. Right? And so when it comes to vision and values, right, and we look at the superintendent, you see words like supports, assists, advises, right? In this area, that's what the superintendent does. Now you'll see that also once the vision is there, at the end of that statement, it says ensures implementation, right? Because again, we're back to those management responsibilities of the superintendent. But now look at what the board's verbs are. Adopts and communicates the shared vision, right? And so very different. Your authority as a board comes at the board table as a group of 7. Do you as an individual have any authority?
No.
No.
Right.
No.
You should see everybody's head shaking no. As an individual, I hold no authority. My only authority comes from the vote that I give, and then the support that I give the decision of the board afterwards. So that's a quick one with vision and values. So if I move to the next one, whoops, goal setting. Here again, the superintendent is assisting and advising the board, right, in creating those goals, and making sure that they're aligned to the vision, right? Periodically reports the progress. The board's role is to ensure that vision is in place as well as those goals. And that you're gonna make sure that resources are committed to its attainment. Now you do that through what?
The
How do
budget,
you ensure the resources are there?
the budget,
Oh,
The budget. Yep. So you put your money where your priorities are, right? And you do that as a board through the budget. So do you start seeing the pattern of the differences in the words that are being used? I think a really good example that, and so you can see, you're going to have all these different categories. I think this is a great example of where boards find themselves most often kind of in trouble, if you ask me, and where in the area they don't belong. And it's in the place where you have one employee. If you haven't heard that before, you should be hearing that now.
yeah.
You hire one employee and you evaluate one employee. Everybody else works for the superintendent. And I was doing some work in a district long-term, and part of my work was to observe their board meetings, and then we would work on some things, and then I'd come back and observe again, right? And this was ongoing. And so imagine my surprise when they got to a recommendation from the superintendent for hiring, because the legislature tells you that that's a function that you have to check off. So the superintendent recommends hiring these folks. And so imagine my surprise when the questions at the board table from individual board members sounded something like this. I would like to see the list of all of the people who applied for that position. I would like to read all the resumes. I would like to know why particular individuals weren't advanced through the process. Would those be appropriate board questions if you're following this board role as it
No.
relates to employment of staff?
No, but Debbie, I have a question.
Okay.
Along with that, we do have the responsibility of setting job titles, and we approve the responsibilities with that job title when it comes to us, correct? So if a new job is created, let's say, just so we're all on the same page, if the job is the same but the title has changed, do we vote on that before it's posted?
What I find most often happens is a superintendent brings that information to the board as an informational item.
Before it's posted,
At some
or
point.
not necessary?
Yeah, at some point in the process. I don't know necessarily that a title change is something that, it's not something certainly that has to have board approval. Normally, board approval is only sought if you're going to expand. If you're going to expand an administrative cabinet, but not if you're changing some minor responsibilities or a title. That's more informational.
Debbie,
And-
I have a
and
question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Dee. I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna ask one more, but if it's a brand new job with responsibilities, then it's something we should agree to before it gets posted, right?
It depends on the structure that you have in place. And so, you know, if the board has approved, let's say, a new program around instructional support, and you say, superintendent, we've approved the program, and the superintendent then carries out the function of that, then it would be up to him to determine how many individuals you needed to carry that out, what their title would be, and that sort of thing, right? So it depends on the framework you already have in place that you've put there for the superintendent to work within.
Got it.
Most often, boards give quite a bit of leeway in that area to the superintendent, because again, you know, the superintendent is going to be held accountable for those decisions in their evaluation process, right? Are they putting in place the people that are needed to carry out the vision and the goals that have been put in place and agreed upon?
Okay. Yeah, I was always taught before we had to have a position created in order to post it. So that's why I was just trying to follow the logic there.
Yeah, I mean, Angel could get legal counsel on that or ask Brad Banasic. I don't pretend to be the legal guru, but in most instances.
Okay, no, fair enough. That's what I needed. Thank you, Beth. Go ahead.
Okay, so Debbie, so my question is, since we're, you know, basically, like you said, a new board, we don't have a vision, goals, wouldn't the superintendent want to do it to gain trust with the new board? Wouldn't that be something that you would just want to bring to the board?
Yeah, again, you know, there's lots of ways to build trust, right? And this is an art more than a science. And so if the superintendent felt like, you know, bringing this information to the board in a potentially some sort of study session or subcommittee structure, to sort of do a heads up, maybe it's a routine Friday notes, something along those lines. You know, a lot of superintendents find there is value in laying the groundwork with boards, especially young, and we're calling you guys young, right? Because of your short experience seated at the table. They find ways to, you know, provide information so that a board feels ready to make decisions. And that looks different in every situation, right? And you're going to see one of the things we're going to talk about in a few minutes are protocols, and that might be something useful for you guys along that vein.
Yeah, because I was thinking, even like in a, you know, the weekly update, it could just be mentioned or something so that we don't feel like we're surprised about something.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about surprises too in a minute.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Debbie?
So yes.
This is Mrs. Thompson. I've heard a lot of talk tonight about goals and visions. What we did, because we knew we had in the last 2 years never set goals for the superintendent, is each person came together, we had a meeting. Each person brought 3 or 4 ideas, and we really haven't accomplished any of that yet. We need to still choose those goals. But in the background, is that something that the superintendent, if he's already doing all this other stuff, would that stuff be part of his goals? I guess I'm confused as to how we set goals if he's already doing so much, he can't handle the things that we're talking about setting.
So again, you know, your superintendent was hired by one board, not 7 individual board members with 7 individual ideas of what the goals should be.
Well, no, our point was to take these goals from each person and set them into maybe 2 goals from the board for the superintendent to accomplish over that year. Does that make sense? Are we doing that wrong?
I don't know that you're doing it wrong. I just wonder about the process that you might have used that maybe didn't work as well for this governance team, about, especially because you've all said you have different ideas about how to get there, and we're not real sure
Yeah,
where
we really
there
haven't
is.
voted on anything yet. We haven't come to a decision. I'm trying to clarify in my mind how, if we have to have goals for the superintendent, how do we accomplish that?
Yeah.
So that when we do his evaluation, we can look at the goals we set. And do you understand?
Yep, I do. So Angel, when is your evaluation due to be completed? What timeframe?
December.
Okay. So yeah, you're at the beginning of the 12-month cycle, and yes, we should get some goals set so that Angel is very clear about what those are going to be, at least till the end of December, where you can evaluate them. And then likely, potentially after that, you would have a strategic plan in place, and you would use those goals for his evaluation process for the most part.
Okay. And
so I would
typically are those goals, maybe like, I'm going to throw out, say, curriculum, which is a broad subject, but narrow it down, and say, this is one of the things we're looking at is fixing our curriculum.
Yeah. So
is that a typical goal?
So in the short term, I think we've got to figure out what might be the best process for this group to come to some conclusion around what your goals will be this year.
Okay.
And I would suggest that would be a separate work session with potentially some pre-work done by each of you, to bring those thoughts to the conversation so that we could come to some common agreement around that.
Okay.
And you all could decide whether you think an outside facilitator would be helpful, since you've all said you're a divided board. It seems like it might be beneficial to use someone to come in and guide that conversation and get you to a place where you know what the goals are going to be for this year.
Okay.
And then let's talk about what, a strategic plan or something like that might look moving forward. That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Okay. So let me get back to that employment thing just for a minute. So you heard the kinds of questions that are not appropriate for a board, but as you think about what might be appropriate for a board in that particular area, these might be some of the more, some questions that would be more related to the role of governance. Do we have a hiring practice in place? Do we follow the hiring practice? Is the practice working for us? And if it's not working for us, what do we intend to do to change it? See the very different kinds of questions that a governance role asks versus someone who's involved in management. See, and that's what I want you to think about. What are the structures that are in place, and are those structures that we've helped create through budget and policy, and then your superintendent translates into guidelines and procedures for the staff? Are those things working for us? If they're not working for us, what are we going to do to change them? Those are the more questions that you want to find yourself asking at the board table, instead of that in the weeds kind of stuff about how sausage gets made. Right? Because you don't need to know every detail of every spice that goes into the sausage. It might be nice to know. We might all be curious about it, but it's not necessary, because your ultimate guideposts should be the goals that you have in place, right? And the vision you're trying to achieve. That's what your concern is. The details are Angel's responsibility. And again, Cindy, you said it on something else earlier. It's easier done than said, or it's easier said than done. I got that backwards. Slate. It's easier said than done. And it takes practice. You know, there were times that I sat at the table and I could hear myself asking questions because I wasn't a perfect board member. I don't ever espouse that I was. But I could sit and think to myself, is this a management question or is this really governance? No, I think I have delved where I don't belong. Does it matter how many seats are on the bus, or does it matter that we have a policy in place and we get our kids to school and I know that's happening? That's the question. Not which company we're buying from or any of those pieces, right? So that's what I want you to think about as you look through these roles and responsibilities, you know, at your leisure. I want you to really look at those verbs and really ask yourself, when I get my board packet in advance of the meeting, or whether I'm at a subcommittee meeting or at the board table, are they questions from a governance role, or are they questions where I'm really getting into management and operations? And, you know, I'm going to say there are going to be times that every board member and occasionally a superintendent steps over into the other's role, right? But what we don't want to see happen is that it becomes a regular practice. Because if you're going to manage the district, you don't need a superintendent. No, unfortunately by law, you have to have one, right? But you see what I mean, right? You have to allow the superintendent to manage the district. And then, you know, you evaluate that management as a board, not as individuals, but as a board, right? Is he meeting the expectations that have been set by a board? Or are we delving into that area and making him somewhat ineffective then in that role because people know they can go around him and come straight to me or my colleague? Because as soon as that happens, he will lose their trust and the respect that he deserves from them in order to get the job done. And you will become a hot mess. If you think you're divided now, wait until people understand that you don't respect the role of the superintendent and they can bypass them at any point in time and come to individuals. It will only get worse before it gets better. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I know I'm kind of saying it point blank. I get that, but that's what can happen. And I don't think
we're,
Beth.
I think we're a board in we're trying to process and progress, and a lot of trust needs to be built here.
Yeah. And, you know, I had a board member once on my own board who said to me, so how do I build that trust? Right? I'm new. I haven't worked with all these folks before. And so I have to ask a great level of detail of questions all the time to make sure that I trust what I'm being told, so that I trust that they've done their due diligence, and so that I trust I'm getting accurate information. And I said to him, because I was board president at the time, I said, do you need to ask that level of detail on every issue to build trust? Or do you just need to do it sometimes? Kind of like a check-in, right? So today I've got some questions around a particular topic. This is going to be one of those things where I'm going to ask a few more questions, and I'm going to ask probably a few more details that are probably more than I should, but it will help me build that level of trust. And he was like, well, I guess I could do that. And I said, do you think if you found that on those occasions when you did it, if it was reflected that, yeah, I can trust what I got from that conversation and that data or whatever it was that he asked for. I said, do you think then that you could sort of apply that to other areas? That it would be something reasonable to say, if they've done their due diligence in this particular one, I can assume that they've done it elsewhere as well. And he said, yeah. I saw Rebecca shake her head. And that's what he said. He said, yeah, I guess I could do that. And over time, that's what he did. He started asking the great detail less and less, because he did build the trust. But it does take time. There's no doubt about it. So figure out what your thing is, right, that is going to help you build the trust, and be honest about it. Be open, have a conversation with Angel and say, this is just one of those areas. This is one of my passions, right? For Rebecca, maybe it's about the dropout program or whatever it might be, right? Each of us have some passion, and have the conversation so Angel understands what it's about, right? That you're not fighting with him to move through it. You want to work with him on it, and that you're trying to get to a place where we all trust each other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you're going to do some looking at those slides and the handout. I'm going to flip through the rest. Here's another great way to sort of check in on your roles and responsibilities. It's our board self-assessment. So just like your superintendent is evaluated and all of your staff is evaluated, you can evaluate your own performance, right? There's no mandate that says the board has to be evaluated. And as a matter of fact, some board members would say, I'm evaluated and I'm done. That happens at election time. But that's a really long course correction, right? And in between those elections, you want to work to improve yourself and the rest of the board. And so we suggest that you do an annual assessment on yourselves. It is free with your membership, so why not take advantage of it? Individually, you go online and you rank the 69, I think it is, questions. And then we provide you a printout of those responses, and it looks a little like this. Now,
Yeah.
we're all pretty comfortable with sort of the red, green, yellow, what that means, right? Green is good, right? Yellow is caution, red, we're in trouble. And this is an actual board's report. This is just 3 slides of it. So we start out kind of at that high level, and you probably can't see it, but orange is needs improvement. So in every one of the 7 categories, they got a needs improvement. Then we dig down a little bit deeper, and when you look at that slide in the middle, now you can see there's some variety in the responses in each one of those categories. So even though it comes out as an average of needs improvement, there are some areas that are showing some green in there, right? That's good. Blue shows you I don't know, which also informs your thinking. Boy, if we have a number of people who don't know about this particular thing, then we might need to address that either in an orientation process or in some work session, depending upon what the topic is and how many people said it. And then you can see where some of the orange and the red comes from, right? Then it goes deeper and it takes a look at every question in the assessment. If you want to read the questions, they are online. You can click the button on MASB that you're going to answer. And so there's going to be a page for every one of those questions like that, where it shows the difference of thinking around various topics, all again related back to that Iowa Lighthouse research study. So these are the things we know boards need to pay attention to. How are we working together as a board doing on them? So it's a great way to take a look at what you're currently doing. And then 12 months later, right, you take the assessment again after you'd already, just like you're going to set goals for Angel, you would set some improvement goals for yourself. What are we going to work on this year? What areas should we concentrate on? Whether it's learning more about using data to make decisions, whether it's about our relationships, there's the 7 different categories. What are some of the activities we're going to participate in? It might be a book study, it could be a work session, it could be a CBA class that's very specific in its nature. Maybe it's curriculum, maybe it's something different, right? We're going to set some goals and then we're going to reassess ourselves and see how we're doing.
Deb.
Free activity, best conversation that you can have on a regular basis. Question?
One
Go ahead,
good
Deb.
thing that did happen is at our Oakland County School Board Association, Deb Meckham did our MSB training. She was the host, and Stacy Berkman, the West Bloomfield Board President, was the co-host. Our board did do this assessment that she would come and assist us in what they were training on yesterday. She would assist us in coming up with
Board norms.
what would you say,
Board
Crystal?
norms.
Yeah, the board norms. So she said she offered to come and do that for us as long as the board did our assessments.
Okay, well, there you go. See, I mean, using an outside facilitator doesn't always mean you have to have somebody from MASB. There are other resources available to you. And I know Oakland has really talked a lot lately about trying to be supportive of their boards in their county. And so, we're appreciative of that. And obviously, we're always available too. So yeah, there's different ways to do it. The importance is that you take the assessment and you have some good conversation about improving your practices. That's the value of it, right? And coming together around what are some of those things we should work on. So questions about roles and responsibilities before we move on to the last 2 pieces. And we're going to move through them relatively quickly, but that's because the work for those 2 things is outside of this meeting. Questions?
Yes,
Comments?
that's what our meeting was about yesterday. It was about the school boards having agreements,
Yep.
with contracts between each other. They came up with ground rules and would each sign, come up with the ground rules, sign it, then post it on the website, have it at the meetings. And whenever anyone, say, stepped out of their board ground rules or board norms, gently remind a board member of the agreement that we had all signed.
Yep. So people call them different things, right? So sometimes they're called board norms. Sometimes they're a code of conduct. There's agreements, and you know what? It really doesn't matter which thing you call them. The idea is that once again, you spend some time coming together on some agreement about how are we going to treat each other as we do this difficult but important work, right? What are some things that we can put in place that will help us be more effective as we move through these processes? And so I looked and I didn't see any norms on your website. Oftentimes boards have something like that listed. And you heard Beth just now, we always suggest that when you come to agreement on some norms that you formalize the process by adopting them at a board meeting. Use them, especially when they're new, right? Sometimes you need like a visual. So sometimes I've seen boards print them on their agendas. If you're using electronic packets, it might be a document that you always have. If you're sitting at the board table, again, when we're all able to do that, it might be something laminated at your place, right? That is set out at each board meeting. Could be a poster on the wall. Sometimes board members individually sign that poster as sort of a statement to their communities, right? So there's all kinds of things you can do with them, but it's really about the richness and the process, right, of having the discussion and coming to agreement on some things and then living them. And that's the key, because you've got some board member ethics. Those are in your bylaws.
Yeah.
I would ask each one of you to go back and read those
Mhm.
and just put a little tick mark by the ones you think are working or the ones that aren't, right? So that as you start this work, that's your first place to look. Those come directly from the National School Boards Association, again, based on that research. And we're not going to spend time going through each one of these today, but you could identify, based on what you've told me tonight, I could identify some things in these ethics that you're probably not living all the time. But it doesn't have to be something as fancy and wordy as this either. It can be something as simple as this, right? And these are just some samples. By all means, I'm not saying these have to be yours. I'm just giving this to you as a thought provoker. You did hear me talk before about assuming positive intent. And you did hear me say that we were going to talk about no surprises. MASB recommends as a best practice that no surprises be in your, whatever you want to call them, norms, code of conduct, whatever, right? That means no surprises between each other as board members, and it means no surprises between the board and superintendent. So no gotchas. We are not about, if we're about building trust, we are not about gotchas. We're about giving folks a heads up when we have a question or an issue. We are about asking questions to the superintendent in advance if we have them from our board packet, and not waiting till the board table when more than likely he's going to need to do some research and due diligence to get you the best answer, right? We're about letting others know when we have questions and concerns, and not doing it simply to just fight at the other side. And I'm saying that here because you guys have said there are two sides, right? And so think about what that looks like. Think about a time you as an individual were surprised somewhere and how it made you feel. And did you then perform at your best when you were surprised like that? And I would bet that most of you would say no. Again, if you look at behavioral science, some of us need process time. And you are not going to get best thinking, and I'm one of them. I'm high S. And I need process time for you to get my best thinking. And I bet that you have S's on your board because they make up 70% of the population. And so anytime you do that, it's not going to be anything good coming out of it. And so think about how you can reduce those. That's one that we do suggest in some manner you have. The others, like I said, are things that I think you guys can come to some agreement on. I'll send also along another list of samples. And what I might suggest is this, because this is the first time that you started down this road. Now, if you want to work with, the folks from Oakland, that's fine too. If you want to try and do some work in advance on your own, you can take the list and distribute it amongst yourselves, and each of you identify a couple of things that you think would really help if you could come to some agreement on, and maybe put them back, give back those responses to your president and let her bring back to the group what looks to be some areas of common agreement, and start there. Because there's so much disagreement on the board, that might be a starting place. Again, if you want to think about working with Stacy, that's fine too. Whatever you think will work best to get you to a place where you have some agreed upon norms. And then Beth brought up, what do we do when people step away from those norms, right? Is there a gentle reminder away from the table, one-on-one potentially with, in many cases, the board president, or it might just be the two individuals, right? And I could reach out, and Debbie, I'm just going to use you because you're in my line of sight at the moment. And I could say the next day, Debbie, we agreed that we were going to treat each other with respect. That was one of our norms. And I kind of felt like maybe last night you stepped away from that norm. I'm not sure if anybody else felt that way, but that was the way I felt when you said or did whatever, right? Not threatening, not adversarial, more, hey, this is kind of what we said, and I want to make us get there, right? I want to support our good work. What do you think about something like that?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be helpful for this group?
Yeah, I just,
Angel's like,
yeah, no, I guess I'm just wondering, we just have to decide, do we want to just continue on with you or talk about Oakland schools coming? I don't know that anybody disagrees. I think we just have to decide how we want to do that. And
yeah,
hopefully it won't take us forever to
yeah.
come to
And
a
it's
conclusion.
not something that you need to decide tonight, but I do
Yeah,
want you to think about moving forward with the process, however it best works for you, right? Because that's what we're here to support.
Right.
Is what works best.
And I wasn't saying that we had to use Stacy. I was just saying that the meeting last night the training last night was very good. And to see how their board, and she was one of the hosts with the other lady from MASB, she was just offering to us that offering her assistance to help us. I don't care who we use as long as we're doing it. It doesn't matter to me.
right. No,
just-
and I was just saying, I guess I was just responding to having two offers of help is obviously better than having zero.
Yeah,
We
you
just
do not have to
decide
do
which
this
hand.
alone. That's the key, right?
Yeah,
And that's what we want you to understand. And Deb is one of my best facilitators as well. So, we've got lots of good folks to do this work with you, whatever that looks like, if that's the direction.
And Oakland County School Board, so a couple of us are on their committees, but also the other board members need to know that they have mentors as well that are board members. So a lot of things I'm personally myself, I've been talking to some of the other board members for a couple of years. So, I think MASB and Oakland School Board, both of them are just the knowledge you get just by, going to their trainings and stuff is just outstanding.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's all about taking advantage of all the resources that you have, right? And
Right.
figuring out what you need to support your work and then using them effectively. And I mean, we set up CASBAs. MASB actually set up the CASBA process so that you would have folks close to you who could be resources, right? And so Oakland Schools is the board, is the ISD board I sat on. So I was part of that CASBA for many years. And by far, you have one of the best resources in CASBAs, that the state has in Oakland. So, take advantage of things that they offer you and use us when it's appropriate as well. All right.
And they meet every Wednesday on all sorts of different subjects. It really is just another resource. It's pretty good.
I'll like write down that glowing recommendation from you, Beth. It's good to hear that they're doing good work there. All right, so we're going to switch to the last piece, which is the protocols. And so, we've talked about, the unity of purpose and how we use that as our decision-making guideposts. We've talked about getting a clear understanding of our roles and responsibilities, right? And then now we've talked about the norms and how that can help us in our work of how we treat each other. The last piece of protocols is also about how we go about doing our work, but now it's more about the things that we do and how we can improve our processes, right? And so I didn't see anything in your policies about that. I don't know if you have any protocols outside of the policy manual, because sometimes I shouldn't say I didn't see anything. I did see two things. In your bylaws, you had 2 of my top 6. I don't know if you know what those protocols are, but you actually had them in there, and they are bolded. So you do have a protocol in your bylaws section about board orientation. I would ask you to take a look at it and develop it further. It's pretty basic. It pretty much just identifies a few items that you're going to give to new board members. And I'm going to send you a copy of a orientation checklist that, again, you don't have to use everything on it, but it might help guide your thinking around what new board members should have as part of that process. Because it shouldn't matter whether you were elected 2 years ago or elected in November, your orientation process should be somewhat similar, right? And the level of support provided to you should be somewhat similar. It shouldn't be dependent upon who the board president is or who the superintendent is at a given time. And so you do have that piece about board orientation. I mentioned you had something in there about board development as well. And it talks about board development based on your budgetary restraints. I don't know what those are, but you might want to take a look at that. Highly effective boards understand the importance of learning both individually and together. And so they often, put a stipend in their budget for that learning opportunity. And so like I said, it's not very detailed, so you might want to have some conversation around what does that look like, especially for such a young board. I think it's going to be critical that you support learning early on. And you're in a place now where you've all sort of come to agreement around those things sound good. So let's move down this process. And there are some ways that we can help you with that as well. I'll send the member assistance fund application, and that might get you some assistance in some lower costs as well for different activities that you participate in. So I'm not like David Letterman. I don't have a top 10 list. I do have a top 6 list. So I've talked about the board orientation. So, and you already have something in there about public comment. Mm-hmm. You might want to revisit your public comment protocol in this online version. I don't know, some boards have, updated that public comment rule or because of the, virtual environment. But you ought to at least look at it and make sure that it's serving you well, and how could it be improved, right, to facilitate that process, whether it's virtual or in person when you go back to in person. Things like time limits that are consistent, making sure people understand the rules before they get up to speak. Maybe that's the board president reading a statement prior to. If there's going to be some follow-up, what's our process around that follow-up? If the superintendent's going to contact them or whatever it might be, right? So kind of thinking about how we best can improve public comment, because that's the one big interaction you do have with the public, right? And it's usually around pretty difficult topics. And so making sure those processes are in place to support that will go a long way between your relationship with your community members who come to express themselves. The big one I find really critical is communication. And so remember how I said, the superintendent works for one board, not 7 individuals. And I would bet if I asked the question, and I'm not going to ask it, but if I asked it and I said, what would be your preferred method, and how often would you like communication from the superintendent? Do you think I'd get all the same answer from you?
No.
Nope, I'd probably get 7 different answers, wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And so absent an agreement of the board, and superintendent. Imagine that you're the superintendent trying to address the wants and desires of 7 individuals and how difficult that is. Right? Gloria might want, something written weekly, and Mark might want, a text message, update, and Rebecca might want regular emails, and Crystal might want a telephone call, right? You can see how that just is, an accident waiting to happen, right? And then when you add in the complexities of, well, what about routine items or urgent or emergency? And you can see where, boy, there's a lot of room there for misunderstanding and unhappiness to set in, right? Because my expectations weren't met. And so this is one of the most important ones that I think boards and superintendents need to come to grips with and have a good common understanding, especially since so many of you are new, right? This is a good time to have that conversation. Here's what we're currently doing. What might, do you think this will work for this governance team of 8? If you don't think so, what might be some, tweaks we might need to make? And then again, we have to be willing to compromise, because he can't meet all of our expectations. So we have to find some common ground so that we can do a good job of working on building that trust. And that communication one, that protocol is essential in building trust.
Did you say these protocol considerations, are these the ones that you looked at of ours and think these ones need to be worked on?
You don't have one in communication. You only have the 2 that are bolded.
Okay,
because
right, because personally, I know I'm always the one talking. Sorry about that. Personally, myself, 2 of those are well, really 3 of them: communication, handling complaints or concerns from the community and staff, and public comment are serious ones to me. Reason I'm wanting to update policies and look at the bylaws, because like when our public talks, nobody ever responds back to them. We don't talk to them. Board members don't talk to them, as you know. Nobody responds back to them. They never get questions answered. So like it's hard, because community members come back to board members at times complaining that nobody ever gets back to them. So that's hard. It's putting us in a bad situation as well.
So that's where I said, I think that one does need to be more fully developed. I think it would be helpful to you. And I think adding a follow-up component in that protocol might be what I see often missing, not only from yours, but from others. And so sometimes a way to deal with that is to have sort of a sign-in sheet where they provide some contact information. And you can even say right on the sign-in sheet. Now, you can't require that they fill it in, but you can state it in such a way that should your comment or concern need follow-up, this will facilitate that follow-up if we have your contact information, right? And then board and superintendent, you need to come to agreement about what follow-up looks like, right? Is it, in some instances, will it be a follow-up directly with the person who came and spoke, and maybe it's a phone call by the superintendent? In other instances, the superintendent would likely assign that to someone appropriate based on what the topic is. And then sometimes that follow-up is the board is going to find out, was it handled, right? So maybe in a Friday note or at the next board meeting, perhaps there would be a report made by Angel that said, the board was brought a concern around this particular topic. I want the board to know that it was handled, blah, 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 right? It just, you want to close the loop. And that's the piece in public comment that I often find missing. So it's not surprising that it's not, spelled out in yours, but I would work on that one.
Thank you.
I do think the other 3, like I said, this is my top 6. This is where these create the most angst between, that trust building piece. Information requests from individual board members. You need to have an agreement about what that's going to look like. Again, superintendent works for one board, not 7 people. And if he's constantly getting requests from 7 different individuals about data that they want pulled together or whatever, right? There has to be a mechanism in place so that maybe it's filtered through the board president.
Yeah, we actually, that is the protocol that we have. So.
Okay, well, there you go. Good. You might.
Okay, well, all right. So Cindy, I was not aware of that actually.
Is
I
it
wasn't.
written?
So so sometimes that has worked and sometimes that hasn't. So I definitely can do that. And I'm
doing my best to make sure that everything moves to the person, Angel.
No, I know you do.
Whatever.
I agree. I agree. And I have no problem with that myself, honestly.
Yeah, and it's not unusual, Beth, that, some people would know about it and some not when they're not written down and formalized, right? That's what I see often in districts, is that there are some practices that kind of happen, but not everybody's always exactly aware of them. And so then you get, misunderstandings about it.
Or
right?
they're not practiced.
Or they're not practiced. Yep.
Right. So ours is written, I think ours is written and it's just not practiced.
So again, this would be one of those things that, as you start looking at some of these protocols, that would be something to check in. Handling complaints, another one that creates chaos, right? We all want to help our communities solve their concerns. And so they bring them to us. And one of the first things board members need to learn is to show them how to get their concerns addressed. And it's redirecting to the appropriate people, so that it doesn't matter whether they go to Crystal or to Mark or to Rebecca, they're going to hear that they should take that concern back to wherever it needs to go. And you all need to agree on what that chain of command looks like, so that they handle their concerns with the appropriate parties. With the community, that's because you need to educate them on your role of governance. And with staff, you have to be careful of due process issues, right? So it might be the same protocol or it could be 2 separate ones, but you should come to agreement about how those are going to be handled. And again, all of these protocols, you come to agreement with you and the superintendent. Last one, all about trust building as well as legal consequences, is the issue of confidentiality. You should have something in place around what that looks like. Everybody should be very clear about what can be shared and what can't be shared, because one of your responsibilities as a board member as well is to reduce liability to your district. And confidentiality is a big area where that can be a real problem, should anything ever go, to a legal issue. And so that's my top 6. I'm going to send you a list of some others. And I would just say, start with a couple, right? Maybe beef up the ones you have first and then move on to some other issues. And you can look at the list and you can kind of say, which ones are giving us heartburn, which ones are not supporting our work very well right now. And we would benefit as this governance team if we put something in place so we were all very clear about it. Questions about protocols? We've covered a lot of stuff. Are your brains tired? Like, do you feel like, oh my God, there's so much work ahead of us?
Debbie, this is Gloria Thompson. I'm looking at this last one, confidentiality, and I'm struggling with that one because we will have a board meeting and within minutes sometimes Facebook will be blowing up about what we did, what we said, how we said it. I don't know how to put a stop to this. I don't stay on Facebook. I don't even go into my Facebook page very often. but then I will get phone calls. Did you see this? Did you see that? You know, I don't understand why a board meeting has to be discussed on a social outlet.
I'm going to say this about social media. You know, there are some positives about social media and there are some negatives. The positives are I get to see my grandkids grow up from states and states away from me.
Yep.
And the negatives are the destructive forces that are out there that will take anything that is said in tonight's meeting or any other and using it to further their own beliefs and purposes. My advice to board members is this, and we have a whole class around social media. If you want it, Greg does a great job, and he will really lay out, you know, the various types and, you know, things to know and shouldn't know. But this is my belief. The less board members involve themselves in social media, the better for your trust building. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have your conversations about, you know, the quizzes on social media and somebody's post about their dinner last night. By all means, have all the fun with that part that you want. But as a board member, you have a duty of responsibility to your colleagues, to your superintendent, and to the district to work in a manner that is going to garner trust in this team, not destroy it. Do you want to add to that or do you not want to add to that? Right? When you see a conversation out there, remember that even in your best intentions, you can be misquoted, copy and pasted, out of context, whatever. So even under the best of circumstances, it's fraught for bad stuff. And then when you add in, you were frustrated and it didn't go your way, and so you spouted off on social media, there is nothing that's going to build any trust in that. Not one thing.
And Debbie, can I add something? It's also very dangerous. It is very dangerous. We have community members that I've never even met before calling us out on city council meetings. And, it's a very dangerous situation when people post stuff on Facebook that's not always accurate. And it's dangerous.
The best thing you can do as a board member is when you see something that is inaccurate that's been posted, is drive them back to your own communication structures. So if the district has a social media presence, if the district has a website, whatever you use to communicate, drive them back there for real information, right? Don't get started in the yes or no, this or that, because you can't win. I'm going to tell you that.
Right.
It's always going to be somebody has a different opinion. And again, we're in a crazy time where people are, polarized.
Mm-hmm.
So it only gets magnified. And so, like I said, you're better off to not do much of it, stay away from political issues and drive back to the district when you can do that. Again, Greg has a whole thing on that, but
I'm with Gloria. I post stuff, but I can't see these posts, but I get people calling me constantly. And it's like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know what's being said.
I don't involve myself with them.
No, I don't ever comment back if I do see something, but it just can be very dangerous. And people can form an opinion of you and they don't even know you.
Yeah. And what I'm talking about, is best practices, right? Again, think back to those 5 things that boards should master, right? Find healthy ways to get good information out about the district, even when it's challenging information, right? It's still going to be accurate information if you identify your sources that you're going to use to share it. And that's the way people get their information.
And also, Debbie, one thing is, again, it resorts right back to handling complaints or concerns from the community, staff, or public comments. They need to be responded to. So when when the community members or the public comes forward with something, somebody from the district has to resolve a community member's issue. Somebody's got to respond back to them. That's where we need to start from. We need to do better on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Beth.
No, I'm saying we need to do better on that. That's one way that we can start. So the community sees that we're working towards meeting everyone's goals.
Communication is something that, every district struggles with. It's something you have to constantly work at. And, what worked yesterday doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work tomorrow. You have to make sure that, we've all gotten pretty good in districts about communicating with our parents and communicating with folks who, have electronic means. But you got to really think about, and that's one of the great things, right, around a strategic plan, because typically one of the areas that is identified is communications and community engagement. And think about, how do I communicate with all of my various constituencies in a manner that is helpful to the district and helpful to, the direction we're headed, right? And so that people are aware of what that is. And you have to think about, I use my husband who's sitting on the couch next to me, so he's going to actually hear me say this. Normally, he doesn't hear me say this, but what I say is you have to think about, how do you communicate with someone like him? We live in a district where our children did not go to school. Our grandchildren go to other school districts. We don't get the local paper, and we seldom watch the local news. So where's he getting his information about the school district from? Because I can guarantee you this, he's going to vote in every election. Right? So that's just one segment. I'm just using that as an example. Obviously, I can't say you'd have to communicate with me because clearly I pay attention to education, right? Because I was a board member, so it's in my blood. But for someone like him, you got to figure out how you connect with that person. And you have other groups in your community as well that you can identify, that you have to figure out, how do we get to them? How do they know what's going on? And how do we also, make sure that that feedback mechanism is in place as well, so that we understand what they're thinking, right? Again, benefit of strategic planning.
And I have another question, Debbie, I'm sorry. In the handling of complaints or concerns from the community, I understand that, but we don't handle complaints from staff, do we? That's up to Angel, correct?
Oh, it's absolutely not in your wheelhouse, but are you going to say that in your time on the board yet, you've never gotten a staff member approach you with something they wanted to complain about?
Oh, sure.
Right. So all I'm saying is, what's the appropriate way that you all have agreed is going to be the response when they come to you?
Okay.
Right. So that they understand that you are not going to be their problem solver, and that they need to follow through whatever the agreed upon chain of command would be, so that they get their concern addressed at the best appropriate level, which is usually closest to the source.
Right.
And ultimately, the board is the final authority if it works its way all the way up.
Well, that's what I was trying to say, is that with staff, if staff comes to you and you direct them, which I always do direct them in the appropriate areas, but they come back to you 3 or 4 weeks later and say, my problem is not being handled. And then you direct them in another direction, and they come back to you again, and then they want to speak at a board meeting, and they're not allowed to speak at our board meetings. So that's what I'm saying. And then they're not allowed to contact the board. So it's frustrating. And, it's trust building and communication and things that this board needs to face. I mean, I know they're hard issues, but they really need to face these issues.
Well, it sounds like we've identified that is a concern. And so I would definitely put that on the list of protocols that you might want to tackle early on, so that you can come to some common agreement about what that looks like and what those follow-up mechanisms would be. So that, you know, there are always going to be individuals who bring complaints who are not going to like the answers. And they don't always, you know, that's just the way life is. They're not always going to have it, you know, dealt to their satisfaction.
Of
But
course.
at least if everyone is clear about what the process will be, and that, you know, they can expect to have someone address the concern, right? Then I think you'll go a long way in that.
Debbie?
I
Mark.
keep wanting to say yes. I'm sorry, Debbie.
As far as communication with the residents, years ago, we used to get a newsletter from the school. Can we start that back up again, Angel? Bi-weekly or something?
I think that's a bigger discussion than
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah,
Okay.
we did send one though. We sent one around October, November.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll discuss it at a meeting.
Sure.
But that's part of those structures, right? Having the conversation around what do we want our communication to look like? And then, you know, moving on from there and coming to agreement on it. You know, I have seen some districts move away from paper, you know, mailed out kinds of things. And then I've seen them sort of, that pendulum kind of swings back the other way. And they realize, oh, we're missing a segment. Maybe that's a way to do that. Much like MASB did. We did away with all, we just went strictly to electronic communications, and we found that that wasn't working for some of our members. And so we actually started our magazines again. And so we do those 3 times a year. So it's all part and parcel of that. How do you make sure that you're, you know, capturing everybody in your communications? So we've talked about a lot of stuff tonight, and I think you guys have some stuff on your plates, right? One of them is to set up a process, maybe a facilitated conversation around those temporary goals for this year. Maybe have a presentation about what strategic planning looks like. And then you could make a decision about if that's something you want to undertake, so that those are in place by the time the next evaluation cycle starts, right? Then there's the work on your goals, or I mean, on your norms, and, you know, coming to some common agreement around what those look like, whether you know, use OCSBA, or whether you might, you know, use us to facilitate that work. Again, whatever works best for you guys. And then working on some of these protocols. So I'm going to send those suggestion sheets along with that orientation checklist that you can take a look at, as well as that member assistance fund application that might provide you some financial support in some
That'd
of
be
that
awesome.
work. So with that, I'm just going to ask you, and this is not a question for you to share with each other right now, but maybe at a future date. But maybe as you know, go about your business the rest of the evening, I want you to ask yourself, what would I like this board to be remembered for? If I were to step away from it tomorrow or a year from now, what would you want your legacy to be, both individually and as a group? And then, because we started out the conversation with you can only control your own behavior, you get to take steps on that action. And I guarantee you, if you take steps towards that, you'll see a difference in your relationship amongst all of you. So that's the challenge I'm going to leave you with, is that you decide what are some things that you as an individual can do to make this team move towards that performing category. Not overnight, but over time. And then start doing those. And I bet you'll see a difference in the way you all start to build the trust in each other, in the work with your superintendent and with others. And I bet it plays out in the community as well. When you all can trust each other and show that, I think your community will reflect that back in you. So that's all I have for you tonight. I hope you felt like there was a nugget somewhere in this work tonight that was worth your time, because I know that time is precious and you've just spent a little over 3 hours with me. And so with that, I am going to turn it back over to your president so that you guys can close out the meeting, and unless you have any other
Thank you,
comments.
Debbie. Somebody wanted the floor?
No, I just was saying, thank you, Debbie.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Angel, do we have anything else on the agenda since I don't have it in front of me?
No, it was just a training, so.
So anybody have a comment other than all 7 of us individually saying thank you? Anybody else have anything that they wanted to add?
Ms. Holder, can we
Yes.
possibly just, for anybody that's tuning in, to let them know that our legal was here as a volunteer, just so that they don't think we're kind of misusing tax funds by having our legal here for
Yes.
MASB training?
Yes, they did volunteer to come and sit in if we had any questions. So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you, John.
Anybody else?
I just had a comment, sort of like a board comment, I guess, but I think if we all just stop assuming stuff of each other, I think that we will be able to form a board bond, work cohesively, and get where we need to be, like Debbie said, on the, the side. Assuming I made him, well, I'm going to do this in a private email anyway, but we have to build trust with each other, and to assume why we weren't at a meeting, to assume why we vote a certain way, to assume this, or to assume why we were at someone else's house. All that stuff has to stop, because we each have our own lives. We each have our own things going on in our own lives that make it so that we can't make meetings sometimes, or, whatever. And it shouldn't be assumed that we did it to keep the board divided, because I couldn't make last night's meeting. I'm not going to tell you my reason, because that's my reason. But I don't want it to be stuff that I'm trying to keep the divide in place, because I am not. I think if we just stop assuming things of each other, then I think we will, by a couple months, we'll be at each other's houses having a cocktail, and I'll bring the chips and dip,
See, and Debbie,
That's all
I
I
think
want
you're
to say.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you're assuming that by Beth's and Rebecca's comments about the meeting that it's an attack that you're not there. And I think it's more of them encouraging everybody that can come, when you can come, to come.
Yes.
Because I've learned so much from there, just from listening to different boards. And I came back to Angel, and I'm like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And he's like, baby steps, so
Right.
just stuff that I've for myself, that I've soaked in from those meetings.
And
Right.
honestly, that it had nothing to do with you guys not showing up. I'm just saying that from the day I stepped on this board, I have talked about board training. I've talked about goals, vision, board, changing policies and bylaws and looking at them. It had in no way did it say you 4 weren't there, or you 3 weren't there, or whatever. I was just saying that though those meetings really are good team building meetings. I
Mhm.
wasn't saying that, you know, you all should show up to it. And if we share information with you or anyone, it's because we want you to know what we've learned. Believe
Right.
me, I'm just as busy too. I mean, I go to it because it helps me to be a better board member, and it helps me learn, but I also don't mind sharing the information
Right.
that we get. So,
And I thanked Rebecca. I got her notes and I thanked her for them. And I'm looking forward to putting her notes with Debbie's slides that she says she's going to send them. It's, you know, thank you.
No, Rebecca, I couldn't open up your email for whatever reason, but it's probably me. I'm old man. I don't know this stuff, but I tried.
and we were thankful that Rebecca sent them because, well, at least my notes are not the greatest. So Rebecca takes great notes. So we've just chosen her to take the notes and share them.
Well, anybody,
Nursing school. We had to color code everything. So Crystal likes to make fun of me, and when we go to meetings, and she always says, are you going to bring all your colorful pens and highlighters? So that's what my notes end up looking like when you get them.
well, you guys, anybody needs to get a hold of me, just do it. I mean, I'm open. I'll talk to anybody, you know.
For
We're
me,
on this together. Let's get it to work.
But not after 9 o'clock at night because you're in bed.
Yeah, I'm
Get up
ready to
at
fall
3 or
asleep
4.
sitting right here.
you know, as an outsider, I look at all 7 and all have 7 different strengths. And so really, you know, everyone, that's what makes great boards is Debbie brings a certain strength to the board and a certain perspective and certain skill and talent. So does Gloria and Cindy and Rebecca. And I think if that trust is there, we trust each other, then we could branch out, go and do, and then come back and report. I think is really great because the talent's there between all of us together.
Mhm.
Okay,
Well-
Mr. Abdullah, you hurt
Well,
my feelings.
for example,
I'm
that
sorry, Mark. I'm sorry.
Debbie, that's one of the things is the communication. I'm just going to throw this out there because this is the first thing that comes to mind. Debbie and Gloria were making masks for the students, and I had no clue about them making them. And a past board member were making them. I thought it was a great thing that they did. It was a shock to me when I found out at a board meeting that they were making them. I didn't know, and I would have offered to help or do whatever, but I mean, it's just communication. I know that's just one little thing, but I thought that was a great thing, and I would have loved to have known that they were doing that. So I'm just saying, it's just communication. We don't really talk very often, so we don't know what others are doing, or, you know, there's lots of things everyone's
If sometimes they want to do a surprise, you got to entrust your colleagues. If they want to do a surprise to the community, then maybe they want to do a surprise. So you got to just kind of trust them. This was their time, their money, their sacrifice. And if they requested that it not be disclosed until they were done, you got to honor that.
Well,
that's
and,
Mr. Abdullah, that's only one instant I used. I'm just saying, this is how, if it's a surprise like that, I'm not talking about to the community, but if it's a surprise like that, it could be perceived at times. I'm not saying that was perceived on my part, them doing that, but I know that others felt that they were left out. And then again, it was the majority and minorities were left out. I'm just saying that that's how why we have to do more of these, because communication will build trust.
I didn't help either, Beth.
yeah, you know what? That was my forte. I used to do wedding parties and stuff. It was just, you know, I knew that I could throw a mass together in 10 minutes. It takes some others a little longer. We're still waiting at some bars. But, you know, it's a work in progress.
Well, and I was kind of upset.
I mean, I probably did a lot of masks without even thinking about it.
Well, and what upset me most is that I didn't even know that Gloria sewed, and all these places I'm going all over the place to try to get Amelia's clothes hemmed because she's short staffed.
She's an excellent seamstress.
Yeah, I didn't know that till then. That's what I'm saying. I didn't know.
Thank you, Debbie.
Because I have short pants, Beth. Yes, communication, definitely.
Hey, anybody else?
Do you want a committee update by chance right now?
If you feel compelled, otherwise we can wait till Monday.
It can wait till Monday. I'm fine with that. It just said it on the agenda, so I didn't know if I needed to do it right now.
Yeah, why don't we do it on our normal,
That's fine.
the Monday, our normal business day.
I think Mrs. Hill's trying to say something.
Dr.
Brenna,
Hill.
Dr. Hill, you're muted.
I think she's having a different conversation.
Oh,
Excuse me.
That's what happened when I was telling my husband, be quiet. Yeah, I get it. Okay, you know what? I think we are done. If we can have a motion to adjourn and a second.
I'll make the motion.
Who's that?
Gloria makes the motion. Who seconds?
I will second it. This is Beth.
Beth will second, and with that, we'll take a roll call vote. Ms. Zott.
Okey doke. Ms. Holder,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Chambliss,
Yes.
Ms. Beaver,
Yes.
Mr. Holcomb,
yes, I'm enjoying this.
Thinking about it.
and myself. Did I miss anybody?
You missed me.
Oh,
Yes,
Beth, I'm so sorry.
that's all right. Yes.
Thank you, Debbie, for coming tonight.
Thanks
Deb.
for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Bye.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you, and
Good
we'll
night.
see everybody
night.
Monday.
Mhm.
By the way, the
Okay.
motion passed
Oh.
7-0 to adjourn the meeting.
We're adjourned. Bye.
See you
Bye.
Monday, everybody.
Bye-bye.